Jordan Peterson went on the PBD podcast. The guy who hosts it is the guy who does the YouTube channel Valuetainment. And Jordan had a moment here where he talks about direct democracy and how he's really not a fan. So let's watch and then I'll react.
The entire parliamentary system is set up to follow the public in an intelligent way. It's not easy to figure out what people think or what they want. It isn't even easy for individuals to figure out what they themselves think or want. It's really hard. And these traditions that we've set up of representative democracy are ways of listening to the people that are measured and thoughtful and long-term. And they're being supplanted by idiot opinion polls that are run by people who have instrumental desires. They want to win the next election. And I know you have to win the damn next election, you know. But pandering to a mob who's frightened because you scared them, that doesn't constitute leadership. It's certainly not democracy. There's a reason we don't have direct democracy. There's a reason for that. It's like rule by impulse. It's not a good structure. It's not a good strategy. We figured that out a long time ago. Our organizations are way too large and complex for anything like direct democracy to work. We're going to have a vote on every issue? Like, obviously not. People just don't have the expertise for that. And it's not like they shouldn't be consulted. They absolutely should be. The voice of the people is the sovereign master of the political enterprise. But what a leader does is aggregate that voice.
Okay, so he tries to reel it in there at the end a little bit when he says the voice of the people is the sovereign enterprise of the, however he phrased it. He was trying to say, no, actually the voice of the people is like really important, but a good leader like aggregates that stuff together. So there, he went hard one direction, then he was like, maybe that's a little too far. Let me try to reel it in a little bit. There's one area where he's like 3% correct, 97% dead wrong. So first let me go to the correct part. Direct democracy on its own. On its own, why is that problematic? Well, it's problematic because if you are in 1963 in Mississippi and you have a direct vote on whether or not black people should be considered equal and they should be considered American citizens, the racists would win that vote handily. By the same token, you know, if you vote directly on should women have the right to vote, you know, you don't have to go back that far for the people who say no to win that vote handily. So direct democracy does have the potential problem of the tyranny of the majority oppressing the rights of the minority. So that is a real problem with direct democracy, and I don't want to gloss over that. However, the solution to that problem is actually very simple and straightforward. The solution is very clearly enumerated constitutional rights. So in other words, what you say is, look, here are your rights. These are off the table. You can't take them away. Doesn't matter. 53% of the public says, I don't want that thing. No, like free speech. You know, you don't want people say unpopular things. Maybe 53% of people might want to lock up somebody who makes a claim that offends our sensibilities, but you have a right to free speech so that even if the majority decides it, you shouldn't be locked up for it. Okay? But if you have a constitution, you could take all the issues that should be off the table and genuinely put them off the table so that all you have left to vote on are the issues where you should have a direct say and the majority should get what they want. So let's go through some of what he says. He says the system is set up to follow the public in an intelligent way. I totally disagree. Now, I don't know if he's referring to Canada or if he's referring to the U.S., because he says parliamentary at one point in there, which would lead me to believe he means Canada. But certainly in the U.S., I don't know as much about Canada, but certainly in the U.S., the system is not set up to follow the public in an intelligent way. In fact, we had, a study from Princeton that came out maybe a decade ago now, which found that there's like no correlation whatsoever between what the people want and the laws we end up getting. There's a direct correlation, though, between what corporations and the wealthy want and the policies we end up getting. So the system is not set up to follow the public in an intelligent way. The system is set up in modern-day America to serve the donor class, to serve the ruling class, to have corporate rule in the country or oligarchy in the country. That's how the system is functionally set up. That's the effective result of the system that we've set up. He says, representative democracy is a way of listening to the people in a way that's measured and thoughtful. Well, in theory, yeah, but again, in practice, I just described how that is indeed not the case. Then he goes off the deep end and says, well, idiot opinion polls are replacing that. I don't know why a guy who is so insistent on, like, the sovereignty of the individual and, like, an individual person is really complex and interesting and thoughtful. These are things I've heard him say 1,000 times over. If you're a psychologist and you're listening to somebody, they're fascinating, so fascinating you can't stand it. Why doesn't he have that same respect for the collective? If the collective is just a gathering together of a giant group of individuals and you agree that the individuals are fascinating and complex and thoughtful and nuanced, then why with the collective do you just hand wave it away and say, these are idiot opinion polls that came to this conclusion? No, I think opinion polls are actually really important. Now, you can bias it by wording things a certain way, but that doesn't mean you get to hand wave away the entire enterprise when a lot of the polls that are done are not too biased and they're very straightforward and people have clear thoughts on it. I think that matters. I think that means something. He says it's effectively pandering to the mob to have direct democracy or, quote, rule by impulse. I would argue the exact opposite is true. You know what rule by impulse is? Rule by impulse is having politicians make our decisions when these politicians are in the pocket of Chevron and ExxonMobil and Goldman Sachs and the military-industrial complex, companies like Lockheed Martin and Honeywell and Boeing. That's rule by impulse. You have these, like, adult children who are colossally corrupt, who just do the bidding of their donors, and they're doing it, whether consciously or subconsciously, because they want to get rewarded. They want to win their next campaign, so they want to fill those campaign coffers, or when they leave Washington, they want to get a lobbyist gig for $1 million a year to sit on their ass all day. So that's rule by impulse. That's rule by impulse. And then the part where probably the worst claim he makes is, like, effectively, look, you got to rely on the experts, and you got to rely on the intellectuals. Oh, really? How has that worked out for us so far, to rely on the experts and the intellectuals? It was the experts and the intellectuals who got us into an illegal war, an offensive and illegal war that killed minimum 200,000 innocent civilians in Iraq. It was the experts and the intellectuals that brought us torture. It was the experts and the intellectuals that decided so-called free trade deals are wonderful, even though they decimated the American working class and outsourced the jobs for pennies on the dollar. It was a race to the bottom. It was the experts who said, tax cuts for the wealthy are great. Deregulation of the marketplace is great, even though that deregulation led to giant market crashes. It was the intellectuals and the experts who were the problem. They were the problem. Because you could be an expert and an intellectual, but you're well-versed in an ideology that is simply incorrect in the sense that it's power-serving against the needs of the people. So you serve power, you serve the status quo, you serve business as usual against the will of the people. You could be super hyper-educated and intellectual and be wrong, So, look, that claim from Jordan Peterson is an elitist claim. That is elitism. We got to rely on the experts and the intellectuals. Actually, I submit to you, they are more of the problem. They are more of the problem. It's not average Joe and Jane working class person who's just trying to get by and pay the bills and do well by their family. They're not the problem. They're the victims. And I'd rather pick a random person off the street to represent me than anybody who's in Congress right now. Why? Because the random person off the street is not totally bought and owned by corporate America. And they don't have their heads up their ass in a totally detached city in D.C. And then he says, he scoffs at the idea, like, well, what are we going to vote on every issue? My response to that is, the constitutional ones, we're not going to vote on those. Your rights are off the table. But outside of the constitutional ones, yes, we should vote on every issue. We should have a direct democracy. That's why I talk about it all the time. Every time you go vote for president, you should vote on the 5 biggest issues. There's got to be a process to determine what gets on the ballot. But if the American people got to directly vote on, should we have a $15 minimum wage? We'd have a $15 minimum wage. Should we legalize marijuana? We would have legalized marijuana. Should we end, the war in Iraq? We would have ended the war in Iraq. I guarantee you, roughly 80% of the time, the correct side, the side that does the most good for the most people, would win if you had direct democracy. Again, constitutional direct democracy. But this idea that you're so dismissive of this system, here's what I guarantee you. I'm not saying direct democracy would be perfect. It wouldn't. But it'd be so much better than what we have right now. Because what we have right now, there's a reason why the approval rating of Congress goes back and forth between 25% at a high and 7% at a low. There's a reason why that's a case. That's as real as a heart attack. And you know what? The people are right They're correct to feel that way. They know they're not being represented. But Jordan acts like they are, and you just have experts and intellectuals who, are in a thoughtful and measured way are determining what to do. Wrong. That's just totally wrong. Sorry. Completely wrong. So, don't be so dismissive of a system that I think would objectively be better. I acknowledge that there are some downsides to direct democracy. There are. Like I said, if you don't have a constitution with it, it could be a nightmare. The tyranny of the majority could oppress the rights of the minority. That can definitely happen. Sometimes you can get these campaigns that are so ruthless and overwhelming and so well-funded that the correct side of the argument loses because there's just so much funding into the propaganda against it. That can happen too. We've seen it happen before. But most of the time, the proper side wins and common sense rules. And I trust the common sense of your average Joe and Jane in the country a hell of a lot more than I trust the opinions of some expert intellectual elitist who's been reliably wrong about everything for my entire lifetime. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.